Today, for the sixth year in a row, I'm talking about my favorite movies of the year. Right off the bat, I want to say something kind of controversial. I've been seeing this take a lot on social media that 2024 was a bad year for movies, and I have to disagree. And I'll go even further to say that I think the people that are saying that didn't actually watch a lot of movies from this year because there was some really great stuff, especially if you were looking at the smaller movies that maybe didn't get big theatrical releases or were relegated to streaming services. Now, that's not to say that there weren't disappointments this year, because there were, especially if you were only watching big blockbusters. But I think there are still a lot of great gems in this year. Is it one of the best years in movies ever? I wouldn't go that far, but it definitely is not bad in my eyes. As usual, my disclaimers for these kind of videos. First of all, this is based on my opinion, my taste. These are movies that I enjoyed. Secondly, I did not get to watch every single movie in 2024, especially some of the big Oscar contenders, because they were basically in theaters for like 5 seconds and they're not coming back until next year. So if you're not seeing certain movies on this list, it's because I either didn't like it as much as you, or I literally just could not see it because it was not available around me. So with that, let's get right into it with honorable mentions. These are movies I really enjoyed, and some of them did come very close to cracking the top 10, but were slightly edged out by the movies that did make it. Overall though, I would highly recommend these movies if you have not seen them yet. Most of them you probably have heard of, but in case you haven't, I would definitely recommend seeking them out. You won't be disappointed, hopefully. So let's get right into it. The Wild Robot, Abigail, Bad Boys, Ride or Die, Inside Out 2, Rebel Ridge, Transformers 1, The Substance, The First Omen, Conclave, Honora, Nosferatu, Trap, and Wicked. And with that, let's get into my top 10 favorite movies of 2024. Number 10, Odity. This movie gave me what I was expecting out of Longlegs, which is also a good movie, but the marketing made it seem like it was this really scary movie, which for some people it might have been, but for me, I felt it was more just about tension and creepiness. Whereas this one has those things, but it also has some of the best jump scares, I think, of this year. If you haven't seen it, it's about a woman trying to discover what happened to her sister and solve her murder, but there's a supernatural element to it. I thought it was such a creepy atmosphere. I was really on the edge of my seat, and the jump scares did really, really get me. This also has one of my favorite endings of the year. There's something they introduce early on in the movie, and then it comes back around at the end in a really amazing way. If you haven't seen it yet, I believe it's on Shudder, and eventually it might make it to another streaming service, but if you can find it, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a horror fan. Number 9, Dee Dee. This one stands out because it's one of the first ones that I've watched that actually takes place around the time I was coming of age. The characters in the movie are a few years older than I was at that time, but I still vividly remember this era that it takes place in. This is the beginning of YouTube, like 2005, 2006, when pretty much people posted anything. Things weren't really polished. The video quality was poor. People were blowing up stuff, kicking each other in the balls, all kinds of weird stuff. But for me and other people that are around my age, this is probably very nostalgic for you, and that's what I felt in this movie. But I also just feel like it's a great character piece. I also relate to it a lot as someone who's, one, on YouTube, and two, a videographer. Sean Wang is talking about his life and how he started out filmmaking on YouTube with skate videos, which of course weren't always great because the quality wasn't great. And at the time he was like 13, 14 years old. So of course he's not a professional yet. But it's great seeing moments like that where filmmakers start really small and they go on to make bigger movies. I also think this movie did a great job showing just the overall cringe of being a middle schooler going into high school. A lot of this movie felt very relatable for me as someone who kind of teeters the line between millennial and Gen Z because I was born like right at the border of it. But to me, I think this is one of the best depictions of coming of age, and it felt cool seeing a coming of age story that focused on the same time that I actually came of age. Number 8, His Three Daughters. This was another very relatable movie for me, but for less happy reasons. If you don't know, this is a movie that was at TIFF and then later premiered on Netflix. It's about these 3 sisters who are taking care of their dad towards the end of his life. This is something that definitely hit close to home for me because I had something similar happen to me with my aunt a year ago, where we were there in Trinidad at her bedside as she was passing away. And so I really related to that, and I feel like they really captured what that feels like on an emotional level. You see all the conflict going on between the 3 sisters, because of course families aren't always perfect and people don't always agree on things. To me, I feel like they did a really great job of capturing that, and I'm sure a lot of people relate to that. Being in a room with a family member and you see that they are slowly drifting away and there's not much you can really do about it. You can just try and make them feel comfortable. prepare yourself and kind of take care of like the legal stuff that goes on with that. I just think they did a really good job. The acting is off the charts. I don't know if any of the three leads here are going to get any nominations. I don't see them really popping up in a lot of the other award shows that I've seen announced nominations so far. They may still have a chance at the Oscars. I don't know, but I do think it was a really great job. The acting was phenomenal. The writing was phenomenal. And it's a movie that just emotionally resonated with me. Number 7, A Real Pain. Honestly, this movie is very driven by the very strong performances of both Jesse Eisenberg and especially Kieran Culkin. These two are amazing together. Jesse Eisenberg does a great job directing this movie. I love the character work. I love how they explore this relationship between these two cousins. I like this framing device they have where they're going on this tour through Poland to try and learn about their grandma's history in regards to the Holocaust. While the tour element works as this great framing device for the movie, it also allows for a lot of quiet character moments where the different characters are having conversations about what they're seeing on the tour or just their worldview. I also like that the members of the tour group felt like real people on this tour, and the tour guide too. There are moments where Kieran Culkin's character butts heads with different people on the tour, including the tour guide himself, but it doesn't seem like over the top. It feels like a very real conflict between them. Overall, it's a very simple premise, but I feel like they really nail it emotionally. The acting is great. The storytelling is great. These are very rich characters that felt fully three-dimensional. I'm very much hoping that at least one person from this movie gets a nomination. I'm pretty sure it's going to be Kieran Culkin for supporting actor. But if not, it's still a great movie to check out. Depending on where you live, it may still be showing in a small theater near you, but I believe it's going to go on digital the day that this video is coming out, and eventually it's going to be on Hulu because it is a Searchlight production. If you haven't seen it yet, like everything else on this list, I highly recommend it. Wherever you can find it, check it out, especially before Oscars. Number 6, Musica. This is a autobiographical story about Rudy Mancuso, who I knew from Vine, and I think he's on YouTube now, but I remember his music and his comedy skits. This is a really fun take. It's sort of a musical, but not really because it's not songs with lyrics, but it's very heavily about music because it's talking about his experience with synesthesia and seeing and hearing music everywhere out of mundane situations, out of things you hear on the street, interactions between people. There's also this love triangle with Camila Mendes' character that I thought was really well done. Again, this is a movie I relate to as someone that makes stuff on the internet, maybe not as often as I should. But again, this is one of those movies that does really inspire me as someone that does YouTube and makes videos. The supporting cast is also great. I did mention Camila Mendes, but there's also JB Smoove, who plays a friend of his. And then there's some fun facts about this movie. Not only is it Rudy Mancuso's directorial debut, but he also cast his mom as his mom in the movie. And then during the course of the movie, he and Camila Mendes did genuinely fall in love and start dating afterwards. I really think that was an interesting turn of events coming out of this movie, but again, it's a really great time. If you haven't seen it yet, it's streaming now on Amazon Prime and it's pretty much been streaming all year. I'm sure this one has flew under the radar for a lot of people because it didn't really get that much marketing, and I don't think it got any kind of theatrical release, so it's probably not going to be in awards contention really, but I do think it's a very solid movie. Number 5, Civil War. This movie, I think, definitely did not meet a lot of people's expectations, but for me, it totally worked. I knew it wasn't going to be a straight-up action movie because it's Alex Garland, and I talked about that in my last video about mismarketed movies. But what it is, I think, really works. It talks a lot about war photography, about journalism, about the ethics of it. What I think is really smart about the movie is that it does not actually focus a lot on the politics. There was a lot of that in the marketing, showing the map of the US, how it was divided, the different alliances that are happening. I feel like the movie would have been really bogged down if they try to explain all of that. Instead, I think it's a more character-focused road trip movie where this group of journalists are trying to get to DC before the president gets killed. And I feel like that is so much more impactful. Kirsten Dunst plays this war photographer that's been doing it for a long time, and you can tell she's become somewhat desensitized to it. And that's contrasted with Kaylee Spaney's character, who is an up-and-coming photographer who is still very much freaked out by the things that she's seeing. But I like this character dynamic, this student and teacher dynamic, reluctant teacher, honestly. I thought that worked really well. Now, even though this is not a straight-up action movie, it is still very much a war movie. There are some violent moments. There are characters that die, and those character deaths did actually hit kind of hard. There's also one standout scene with Jesse Plemons that you've seen in the trailers. That's probably the best part. The tension is so high. You're very much tensed up the whole time, and then when it does pop off, it gets really crazy. This movie right now is streaming on Max. Again, if you go into it expecting it to be a full-on action war movie, then you're probably not going to be as interested in it. But if you go along for the ride and go on this character journey, I think you will really enjoy it. Number 4, Jour number 2. This is a very late entry that came out on my list. I just watched it like last week, and I was actually blown away. Now, the one thing about this movie that really confuses me is not the movie itself, but how Warner Bros. Treated it, because it's such a great movie, and they only showed it in a handful of theaters across the US, like less than 20, I think. There was only one theater in my whole area that was showing it. I cannot figure out why they bury this movie, because it's so, so good. Nicholas Hoult, who actually had a great year this year, he's amazing in it. Toni Collette gives a great supporting performance. A lot of the supporting cast is awesome. I don't want to spoil too much about it, because the less you know going into it, the better. But when things start going, it gets crazy really quick. The tension is really well done. The moral dilemmas happening around this court case are really well done. I like the conflict between these characters and how they're all connected, whether they know it or not. This was an all-around great time. Everything about it I thought was very solid. In terms of court dramas, if you've watched a lot of them, then you won't be as surprised by it, but I love the direction they went with it, and I like where they ended it. I highly recommend watching this. Warner Bros., again, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you bury this movie. I really can't figure out what you're trying to do. Hopefully, this movie still finds an audience years and years from now. Hopefully, it gets some kind of physical release too. I'm sure that would help. But again, this is definitely one of the best movies of the year, which makes it so confusing why Warner Bros. Just left it to die. Number 3, Dune Part 2. Well, I'm sure this movie is going to be on almost everybody's top 10, because it is definitely one of the best movies of the year. While it was not my favorite movie of the year, it's still really awesome. Honestly, what can I say that hasn't already been said? Denis Villeneuve is one of the most talented filmmakers working right now. The movie is visually amazing. The VFX are top-notch. The acting is amazing. The writing is amazing. Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya, who've also both had great years this year, are both amazing in it. Javier Bardem is also great as Stilgar. I know now there's a lot of memes about him, especially with...
Listen, Gabe!
But when you watch the movie itself, there is an element of tragedy to his character, that he's just kind of blindly following Paul Atreides throughout everything, especially when things take a real turn towards the end. This movie is just so well done. I'm very much looking forward to Part 3. Whenever it comes out, I'm sure they're going to take their time with it. If you've, for some reason, not watched the movie yet, go watch it. I hope they bring it back to IMAX next year, especially if it gets an Oscar nomination, because it demands to be seen on the big screen. If you can see it in IMAX, see it in IMAX. It's easily one of the best made movies of 2024. Number 2, Challengers. Zendaya again appears on this list. This is another solid movie. I loved it. I also saw it in IMAX. Everything about it. I love the chemistry between the 3 leads. The music is amazing, especially in IMAX. It's very funky. The cinematography is amazing, especially during the tennis matches. I'm not a big sports person, but the tennis scenes in this movie really had me hyped. I'm also a big fan of non-linear storytelling, and I think this movie does it really well, where you're getting both what's happening in real time with the game, but also going back and seeing all the context and what led up to this match. I'm hoping this movie gets some really big nominations. I know this is going to be tough because it came out earlier in the year, but I do think it is one of the best movies of the year for sure. It was amazing watching it in a theater. If you can't watch it in theater, you can stream it on Prime at home. But again, if they bring it back to theaters next year, I highly recommend checking it out. Even if it's not in IMAX, I think it's still worth it. And last, but certainly not least, my number 1 movie of 2024, Strange Darling. This movie came out of nowhere. I think 2024 was actually a great year for horrors and thrillers. This is another one of those movies where you should go in knowing absolutely nothing and just go along for the ride. The basic premise, without giving away too much, is that it's centering around this serial killer and how the serial killer was eventually captured. This is another nonlinear story. Again, I like nonlinear storytelling, especially when it's done right. This movie does it, I think, the best of any of the nonlinear storytelling movies of this year. I did not expect what was coming, and the moment it clicked for me, I was like, oh shoot, like I genuinely got so hyped when I realized what was actually going on in this movie. Willa Fitzgerald and Kyle Gallner are both amazing in this movie. If it was up to me, I would nominate them for acting awards because they both blew me away. The amount of tension, I felt the most tense watching this movie. This is probably the most suspenseful movie I think I've watched this year. There are some scenes where I really was not sure what was going to happen. I was really just tense in my seat as I was watching it unfold. Wherever you can find it, if you can get it on physical, if you can rent it on streaming, do that. Watch this movie. You will not be disappointed. It is easily my favorite movie of 2024. And with that, that wraps up my top 10 movies of 2024. Let me know what yours are down in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more of my videos about movies and TV. If you want to watch one of them right now, you can look at this one that YouTube is recommending to you. But if not, I hope you have a great rest of your year, and I will see you in the next one.